The world marketplace is becoming more and more interconnected, and here in Utah, one of the biggest reasons for our economic success has been our ability to connect our cities into one larger region. So the question begs, how does Salt Lake become part of an overall larger region in the West, and how do we compete in a global marketplace as a team? Joining us today to discuss that, Michael Gallis. He is an urban strategist, and he was here to talk today to a group of business leaders at the Chamber. Michael, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
I want to start today. One of the things you mentioned in your presentation, this idea of interconnected metro islands, that Salt Lake is has to be part of a larger group to succeed. So why do you say island metros? What exactly do you mean by that, and how are we doing?
Well, some years ago there was a report put out about the Intermountain West, about mountain megas, and they talked about the growth of large metropolitan areas, that what had been small cities, Salt Lake, Denver, etc., had experienced and became the high growth areas in the United States and had evolved into large metropolitan centers. I was amazed in flying in to, as I came in from the south, the airplane over Provo, and I was flying up north. I couldn't see a break with Salt Lake. I mean, become one continuous, we call a pattern of urbanization. Well, if you look at the western United States, Salt Lake, Denver, Phoenix, Las Vegas, you notice something about the West that's very unlike the East of the United States. You have large concentrated areas of urbanization like Salt Lake. Beyond that, you don't have secondary, tertiary cities that form a grid or form bridges to the next city. You have a lot of open space with very tiny towns along the way, and then you get to another large metropolitan center. So they function like economic and population islands. They're in the East Coast, they're not really islands. When you really think of Boston and New York and Washington and Philadelphia, they're so close that they interact all the time. When we think of economic growth in a global economy, we think of how do you create access? How do you create interactions? Because as I said this morning, Econ 101, right? You have to have a buyer and seller to have a market. The more buyers and sellers that participate in the market, the larger is the market. As we've grown to become large metropolitan centers, we still face the challenge of how to connect to the world grid. And part of that starts with how do we connect to each other. And as we build connections with each other, we strengthen those interactions. Right now, those connections are tenuous. They're long distance. We either fly there or drive there, both of which represent a barrier to the interactions. So the question is, how do we connect more tightly? How do we increase the interactions? How do we participate more easily in the world economy and the economy of the regions around us?
The geography of the West, as you mentioned, presents a challenge in connecting these cities, but these island metros, as you put it. But what's the opportunity there? What's the upside for if we can somehow all get on the same page in Denver and Las Vegas and Salt Lake and Los Angeles and Seattle? We can sort of work together more closely.
Well, it's simply building a larger economic unit. You talk about how Provo used to be a town down the road, and you drove through the countryside to get there. Ogden was up there, and now it's like continuous city. And as it became continuous city, the interactions became much heavier between them. People going back and forth, living here, working there. And so the total economic growth has been one of the fastest in the West. Years ago, when we built the interstate system across the United States in the 60s, if you can imagine driving across the United States and stopping at stoplights all the way. When we built a continuous freeway where you didn't have to stop, you just got off to get gas or get food or whatever, we had the biggest GDP growth in the history of the United States. Because suddenly, rather than being isolated points, we could now trade across, coast to coast, back and forth, in a way the railroads didn't provide us. And so we had enormous economic growth during the period of the 60s, biggest since the end of World War II. So this issue of creating levels of connectivity through which we can interact more freely is fundamental to economic growth. In a world economy today, you can see how the San Franciscos and Los Angeles, Chicagos are connected to the world grid. But beneath that, are we going to start to drop out of the grid, or are we going to strengthen our connection to the grid? And that's the challenge and the opportunity for us today. So high-speed rail has a whole different meaning here. How to increase connectivity? Because we have the air, we have the freeways, we have Amtrak, but Amtrak's so slow not really practical in economic terms. So our challenge is how to connect to the grid, the global economy. Is going to be easier to get here or increasingly hard to get here?
Are you talking about a physical connection, sort of a, when you talk about a railroad, that's in some ways making a physical connection between two areas.
Yes.
When you mention the grid, I think a lot of people think about the internet, and we're connected mentally in a lot of ways. So we're talking about a physical connection?
We're talking about a physical connection because we talk about communications now made it possible to source around the world. I mean, you can sell something on eBay and sell it to the world. You can be a global businessman yourself. In fact, many people are. But that involves still the shipping and movement of goods and the complexity of products in today's world, involving so many pieces and parts that begin in different parts of the world. And so we still have the importance of moving goods through the world in the same way we move people through the world. So communications hasn't stopped that. In fact, it's facilitated it. But now the question is, the Intermountain West, the distances between them, how do we keep pace with the demands of a world that wants to move things faster, wants things better synchronized, and wants them to be able to come together at the same time at the same place? How do we keep up that technology and those investments so that we in the Intermountain West are thought of as key points in that network of connections and not thought of as being someplace remote or difficult to get to? That's the key issue on the table for us.
So when you look at Salt Lake City or the state of Utah more as a whole, what are we doing right? How are we positioned to make this connection?
Well, it's interesting. Salt Lake and Utah has been doing a lot of things right for a long time. I mean, it's remarkable, really. You had the Envision Utah that started people thinking about the future. So often in this country, you have people that want to go back to some point when, things were good. We're not going back. We're going forward. There's going to be more people, more demands for goods. There's going to be greater interaction across the world. So how do we structure that? How do we make the right investments? We got a great transit system connecting the three cities. I mean, that's remarkable. Ogden to Provo, the rail network, and then we have light rail so that we have transit alternatives. And all those things have been great. The rebuilding of downtown, great. But now the question is, in a global sense, we've connected Provo, Ogden, Salt Lake. We've got that network going. But now how do we connect that network to the world network? Let's think about that. It changed Chicago, it changed Atlanta, it changed New York, and those big metropolitan areas and Los Angeles all day long think about how do we get to the world, how do we strengthen those connections. So while we think of Ogden to Provo, we got cities thinking about us to Shanghai, Beijing, Paris, London, Buenos Aires. They are thinking about how to access the world. So I think we have done a great job connecting ourselves, but now we have the problem, it's not a problem, the issue of how to connect ourselves to the world.
One of the ways that Salt Lake is connected to the world, obviously we sort of came onto the world stage in a big way in 2002 when we hosted the Olympic Winter Games. One of the ways that I think we're connected to the world is that with a Delta Airlines hub at Salt Lake International Airport, we are connected directly to Paris, and in parts of the year we're connected directly into Asia as well. How important is that, especially in keeping in mind that we've just committed to a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar effort to rebuild our international airport here in Salt Lake?
Well, it's hugely important, and that's what I say, you're doing a lot of things right here. Now, what is the next generation? What you're doing can't be discounted. The importance of developing the airport, the importance of the transit system. But you also have the UP rail line coming through here. You got the interstate system coming together. And rather than think about individual investments, I think at this point in transit or air, it's how do they come together? How do they come together and form a network of connections? Rather than transportation investments in specific ones, it's how do we invest in connecting them? As I said today, the issue is today reliability, cost, and safety, really in that order. How do we make sure that we don't build rail over here and air over there and transit over here and this over here? Now we got transit into the airport, which is people. Now about freight movements. We're in a unique location. So The next generation, I think, is how to think in integrated terms and how to think of our strengthening those world connections.
I want to finish up with one final question. You are here from Charlotte, North Carolina.
Yeah.
Secretary LaHood, on his way out, it appears, he's been a good friend of, I know, UTA and other folks that deal with mobility issues here along the Wasatch Front. Your mayor, Mayor Fox, is the nominee to take his place. Tell us a little bit about the man who may be in charge of the Department of Transportation.
Well, I think it's going to be good for DOT. Mayor Fox has been a very progressive mayor. He thinks of the future. He doesn't think of the past. He's very concerned about people. He's very concerned about jobs and making sure that people are prepared to participate in the workforce. He's also very involved in transportation and supporting transportation investments in the region. Even at times against a lot of people, naysayers of that, he can see the future, and I found him to be a very creative guy, very accessible person, and very focused on the future. I think he has a big future in front of him.
Michael Gallis is an urban strategist and a good friend of the next Transportation Secretary of the United States. Michael, thanks for spending some time with us today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great.